Good afternoon. You'll have to excuse me, I'm a bit congested. But hopefully we'll get through this. Okay, so it's been a while since, I think the last class that I taught here was maybe for Parshas Vayechi. So it's been, maybe we did one after, but it's been quite a few weeks. And when we progress past Sefer Bereshis and the exciting parts of Shemais, once you hit Mishpatim, I'm like, okay, what are we going to talk about? It's a little less exciting. We're talking about building the Mishkan and Karbanais and stuff like that. It doesn't feel so as compelling and as exciting. So I guess the goal of today's class, and then hopefully the classes in the next few weeks, will be to find relevance in these parshas that are not exciting stories or discussions of personalities that feel relevant to us as we were doing in Sefer Bereshis. So in general, this week's parsha, we start... There's so many things on this table.
That's good. Try now.
So in this week's parsha, we start building the Mishkan, and basically God opens up the donation floor to accept donations to build the Mishkan, and the Mishkan is going to be Hashem's resting place, a home for Hashem. And there's a lot of interesting things that we can talk about this. First of all, the fact that Hashem built the Mishkan specifically with donations from the people. Everyone had to donate. Either there were many different types of donations that people gave, which is what we're going to get into a little bit later in the class, but it wasn't that Hashem could have said, the whole time they're traveling in the desert, Hashem is making all their needs appear. Their food, their water, their shelter, it's all happening miraculously. So Hashem could just make the Mishkan appear miraculously, right? You would think that that's something of all the things that are going to be miraculous. Shouldn't the Mishkan be miraculous? Just make there be gold falling from the sky, the same way the mun falls from the sky. Or even better, make the entire Mishkan fall from the sky. So we see that there's a necessity for the people to give and to create the Mishkan for Hashem coming from themselves. That there's intention that it needs to be their own donations, coming from their own possessions. And that they're supposed to build it with their own physical labor. And every single time they move from place to place, they take it apart, they put it back together again. That it's the responsibility of the people to create the home for Hashem. And it's in this point that we can find relevance, because in this, in the words, "V'asu li migdash v'shachanti b'seichem," you should make for me a migdash. This is what said. Hashem was referring in this case to the Mishkan, and I will dwell within it. Chazal teach us that it says b'seichem. It means within them, within each and every person, and this is famously brought in Basi Lagani to tell us what is our mission in this world. That making a Mishkan was not a one-time endeavor in the desert, but this is our mission in this world. Our mission in this world is not just to make a home for Hashem, but to become a home for Hashem. So I'm not making a home for Hashem outside of me, but I myself, in my physical being, am a home for God. My physical self is a place where Hashem could reside. That is what creating a Mishkan is, which again means that it's coming. I need to be giving the donations from myself. I need to be giving from my own possessions, from my own time, from my own being, to create a space where God is comfortable, where God can rest, where God can just be and is apparent. That's my purpose, and that's my mission. So when we look at it from that lens, it's suddenly something that is relevant to us right now. So we're not building something physical outside of ourselves, but in the construction of the Mishkan and in how they went about building the Mishkan, we learn for ourselves, how do I become a home for Hashem? How do I make myself be someone who Hashem is comfortable residing within? So that is sort of the lens that we're going to look at it. So I brought just the sources so that it will be a little bit easier to follow along because we're going to look at some differences in the text. So I'm just going to read the beginning of this week's parsha. It's the second two psukim. It says, Daber el b'nei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, vayikhu li truma, and you should accept for me gifts, me'ez kol ish, from every person, every man, asher yadvenu libai, whose heart is so moved to give a gift. Tikhu as trumasi, you should take my gift. V'zais hatruma asher tikhu mi'itam, and this is the gift that you took from them, zahav, gold, v'chasef, and silver, v'nechaishes, and copper, right? So it's very interesting over here. We see the word truma repeated 3 times in this one pasuk, in these two psukim. It says, vayikhu li truma, tikhu es trumasi, v'zais hatruma. 3 times that this word truma is repeated. And if we look at Rashi, Rashi quotes a Yerushalmi, which basically explains to us why is it that this word truma is repeated 3 times. We know the Torah is extremely specific and never redundant, doesn't just repeat words for no reason. So if this pasuk is quite repetitive, why is it that this word is repeated 3 times? If we look at Rashi, he says, Amru Rabbi Seinu, our rabbis teach us, Shalesh trumas amurais kan. 3 times the word truma is said over here. Achas trumas beka legolgolas shenasu mehem ha'adanim. The first one represents the truma of a beka, which is a half a shekel for each head, legolgolas, for each head, shenasu mehem ha'adanim, that they made the adanim from them. The adanim were the sockets. So the Mishkan was consisted of like beams, and the beams went into these sockets. And what were the sockets made from? They were made from the donation that was given, the half shekel per head that was given from the Jewish people. So that's the first time that it says truma. Kamesha mefarash be'ela pekudei. The achas truma samizbeach. The second one was the truma for the mizbeach, beka legalgailas. Again, a half a shekel per person. Lekupais liknais mehen karbanes tzibor. That this was basically the communal pot. That from this communal pot they bought all the different karbanes tzibor. They bought all the different collective karbanes. So there were different karbanes that were brought in the Beis HaMikdash and the Mishkan daily. People would bring individual karbanes, but there were also collective karbanes that were brought all the time. First of all, just like the 3 times that we chakras mincha mariv, right? Those were 3 karbanes that were brought during the day. There were collective karbanes brought on Yom Tovim. All the time there were these general karbanes that were bought. So where did the money for these karbanes come from? The money for these karbanes came from the collective pot. So everyone gave their half a shekel and a year, and that half a shekel then was used to purchase the animals for these or whatever else it was, animal flour, whatever they were using for these collective karbanes. So that was the second, that's why it says truma the second time. The achas trumas hamishkan, and the third was the trumas hamishkan, the general truma for the mishkan, nidvas kol echad ve'echad, that every person gave from themselves. Yod Gimel Dvarim Amurim, the 13 different things that are mentioned. Ve'inyan kulam hatzurchu lemelachas hamishkan, lebigdei kahuna kashe tidakdek behem. And then from this were made all the different construction pieces of the Mishkan, or for the clothing of the priests, etc. So the third was just general donations that it was open donations, right? It's like, we need these things and you can give whatever it is that you have. We need gold. If you have gold, give gold. If you have certain materials or dyes, give those things. So there was a list of materials, and everyone was able to give what they wanted. So there were 3 different donations that took place. We're a little technical now. We're going to get less technical in a minute. So 3 different donations that take place. The half shekel for the sockets, specifically for the adanim. The half shekel for the karbanes. And lastly was just the general donation to use for the rest of the mizbeach, that everyone brought their own donations. And specifically, this last one is the one that's really discussed at length in this week's parsha. So in this week's parsha, it just briefly mentions the first 2 are only hinted to in the fact that it says truma 3 times. But the last one is the one that's discussed at length. So now we're going to try to understand what do these different donations represent. If we said that building a Mishkan is also an individual activity that we're each doing on our own within ourselves, what is the difference between these three types of donations? How do they represent themselves in our current Avodas Hashem? And also, why is it that it's specifically this last one that is elaborated on? Right? Especially because the first two are also totally part of and essential to the Mishkan. The adanim, the sockets, the reason they have their own separate category is because they're actually like foundational pieces of the Mishkan. Because it's not going into the ground, you need these sockets to really hold it together. And the karbanis too. Without what's the point of the Mishkan without the karbanis? For us, it's a little foreign. We don't think of the necessity of karbanis in our Avodas Hashem. But back then, in the Mishkan, that was the main thing that was going on. What was going on in the Mishkan? Karbanis. And lighting the menorah and a few other things. But the main activity going on was karbanis. So karbanis seem to be pretty essential. So why isn't it elaborated on? Why is it specifically this last one that is elaborated on? And we're going to read one more source. Another very interesting, kind of strange medrash. So on the second pasuk that it says, "V'zeish hatruma asher tikhu gaimer zahav." Okay, right. So that's the second pasuk over here. If you see just the third source, so this is in the Medrash Tanchuma. Zahav, gold, keneged malchus Bavel, represents the kingdom of Bavel, and he brings a proof for that. Kasef, the silver, keneged malchus Madai, represents the kingdom of Madai. Madai was together with Persia. And he brings a proof for that. Necheshes keneged malchus Yavan. Necheshes, copper, represents the kingdom of Yavan, Greece. V'ayres elim adamim, and iris elim adamim, those were it's not in this pasuk, it's in a further pasuk. These are the different skins, right? The different ram skins that they use to make what's it called? Yeah, the outside layer. The word is slipping my head. Basically, they use these skins to cover the Mishkan, if someone remembers. Yeah, but it's what's it in English? It's like drapes, but it's the curtains, but it's not really a curtain. The tapestries. Thank you. Okay, so the tapestries, those are made with Eretz Elam Madamim, and that represents Edaim, because Madamim, you can hear the word Edaim. So why is the Medrash saying that the materials, it's such a strange Medrash, the materials represent these nations, these kingdoms. Who are these kingdoms? These are the kingdoms specifically that persecuted us. Bavel, Persia, Madai, Yavan, Greece, and Edaim. They're the ones that persecuted us. They include both nations that actually destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. And we're talking about the materials that were used to construct the Beis HaMikdash. So why are we saying that they represent these nations? It's just very perplexing. Like, where do you make this connection between the materials being used in the Mishkan and these non-Jewish nations, specifically that were so destructive and persecuting us? What do they have to do with each other? So we have these two questions. First of all, or three questions. What are the three different types of donations represent in our Avodas Hashem? Why is the third one emphasized and elaborated on more than the first two? And also, what do these different materials have to do with these foreign nations? So to answer this, we're going to first explore the first question. What do the three different types of gifts have to do with our Avodas Hashem? So these three different types of gifts represent our Avodah in this world. How do we do our service of Hashem in this world? And in Pirkei Avos it teaches us that there are three ways that we basically engage in our Avodas Hashem. We have Torah, learning Torah, Avodah, which means davening, and Gemilas Chasadim, which means helping others. And in general, in Chassidus, when we refer to Gemilas Chasadim, it includes all physical mitzvahs. It's the same way in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about how tzedakah represents all physical mitzvahs, because it basically represents, what is tzedakah? It means taking something that's mine, that's physical, and giving it away, which means that I have a consciousness and a realization that the physical world and my physical belongings are not really just mine, and they're not really just there to be a physical reality. They're there to be transformed. So the concept of Gemilas Chasadim means, it represents looking at the physical world and seeing what I can do to make it better. That it's not just there for me, my stuff is not just there for me, it's there for others. So connecting to it on a higher, less selfish, from a higher, less selfish consciousness. So we have Torah, Aveda, and Gemilas Chasadim. So Torah, we would say, is the foundation of Judaism. Without learning Torah, you don't have anything else, right? We don't have Judaism without Torah. Torah teaches us how to act. Torah teaches us what our belief system is. So if you take away Torah, the whole Jewish nation falls, the whole Jewish religion, put it that way, falls apart. It's the foundation of our religion. Everything else, you can say, stands upon it. And therefore, it is represented by the Adanim, the sockets of the Mishkan. The sockets of the Mishkan, like we said before, were the foundation holding up the entire Mishkan. And it seems something small, just like these sockets, but what happens if you get rid of those sockets? The whole thing collapses. So if we're talking about what is the foundation of the Mishkan, that is the Adanim, and that represents, if we're saying, oh, I want to give the donation to the Mishkan, what am I giving from myself to create a Mishkan for God within myself? Step number one would be to set up a foundation, which in us would mean learning Torah. Learning Torah is the step number one foundation for building my Mishkan within myself. Step number two is Aveda. And Aveda means davening. Currently, in the world that we live right now, Aveda is, how do we do our Aveda? How do we do our service of Hashem? Is through davening. And davening, as we know, is in place of karbanes. That during the times of the Beis HaMikdash, they would bring karbanes. And now, instead of karbanes, we daven. That's why we have set up tefillas 3 times a day, are corresponding to the karbanes that were brought in the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. And what is it about a karban that it is Aveda? If we think about a karban, again, we're taking our animal and we're bringing it on the Mishkan to completely and totally subsume it towards God, so that it should be Hashem comes down and lifts the animal up, right? The fire comes down from heaven, and that basically is elevating the animal. And this is for ourselves personally when we're talking about Aveda, our davening. Davening is a time when we take our animal self, our conscious, regular mind, and we work on it with the word Aveda, quite literally. It's supposed to be a time of deep contemplation and meditation where I'm working through the power of my mind to actually transform my animal. That's what davening is supposed to be. So during this time, I'm able to, my animal soul speaks human language, and if I use my mind to translate spirituality to my animal self so that it understands it as well, and it starts to slowly but surely become more refined and become more aware of godliness. That's what davening is technically supposed to be. And through that, I build a relationship with Hashem. And so that corresponds with the second donation, which was given for the karbanes. And the third one is Gemilas Chasadim, like we said before, that represents just general mitzvahs. And that would be Trumas HaMishkan, the last one, where they gave all the different materials. When they gave all the different materials, what was that saying? All these physical things, gold, silver, copper, animal skins, gathering all the different parts of the world and showing that everything in this world was not created just for the sake of, gold was not created just so that we can have jewelry, and, et cetera, et cetera. Leather wasn't created just so that we can have shoes. It was also created so that it actually says I saw a medrash that says the whole reason that gold was created was so that they could use it in the Mishkan. So any other usage of gold is fine, you can use it, but what is its deepest purpose? Is to be used in the Mishkan. So what that means is this last donation represents the fact that anything found in our world, anything physical in our world, has a higher and deeper purpose, has the ability to be transformed into something with purpose. I wouldn't say transformed into spirituality, but can be transformed into being used for a godly purpose. And that's represented by Gemilas Chasadim. Again, when you're helping another person, that means I'm showing if I make a meal for another person, if I give tzedakah to another person, I'm showing that this physical thing is not just for me. I'm able to see past its selfish purpose and utilize it for a higher purpose. And that goes across the board for all the mitzvahs that we do that are engaged in a physical, that represent something physical, right? So even making food for Shabbos, any mitzvah that we do. Why can't I think of mitzvahs right now? we do lots of them, but any of the mitzvahs that are not learning Torah and davening, for a man putting on tefillin, for a woman lighting Shabbos candles, right? All the mitzvahs that we do that are engaged with the physical world, that are representing this fact that the world is composed of all this material, all these materials, right? I'm just looking at this table over here that's like surrounded by gadgets, so many things, and all of these physical electronic materials are now being used for a godly purpose, to learn Torah. So So in this moment, we're showing that we're making a physical donation to God. We're making a physical donation to our Mishkan by utilizing all these physical things. The beautiful lunch that was prepared, that is invigorating us as we're listening to the class, is again, it's being used that's the physical donation to our Mishkan, when we utilize the entire physical world for a higher purpose. So these are the three donations that were given to the Mishkan. And it's an interesting thing. Like we said before, why is it that it's specifically the last one that is elaborated on? Right? The last one, specifically the giving of the physical stuff to Hashem, that is elaborated on over Torah and over davening. We would think that Torah and davening, these are much more spiritual things. These are much more refined things. So that's what we should elaborate on. So let's think about Torah. What is Torah? Torah is God's wisdom, Hashem's chachma. And he puts it into this world in a way that even our minds can grasp Hashem's chachma. Like it says in Tanya that when you're learning Torah, you are basically uniting your mind with God's mind. It's this very high form of unity with Hashem. When I'm uniting, my physical brain is containing godly wisdom at this moment. It's a pretty awesome thing. But Torah basically, it precedes this world. It's much higher than this world. It says that Hashem histakel be'iraisa bara alma. Hashem looked into the Torah to create the world. That means that the Torah came before the world, right? The Torah comes from a very high and deep, lofty source. And then it comes down to earth to enable us to learn it. But you would say that it's Hashem's chachma, so it's like tethered above, and it comes down to us to become accessible to us. That's Torah. Now, our Vaida, our davening, comes from, where does our davening begin? If we think about davening as a parallel to karbanes come from below. And then, like we said before, Hashem comes down and accepts them. If only we could see that same motion happening with our davening, I think that would be very inspiring if we could see our prayers being accepted in a ball of fire. But we'll have to imagine that fire comes down to actually accept our prayers as well. But where does the motion begin? The motion begins from below and it reaches up to Hashem. That's why it says, Adam ki yakriv mikem karban la Hashem. That a man, you need to bring from among you, from yourself, a karban to Hashem. And like we said before, if we're working on refining our animal, that means I'm taking my animal and bringing it to God, right? I'm like, it's a motion that begins from below, and then it draws close to Hashem, and Hashem basically will draw it up and accept it. The difference between Torah and Tefillah is because Torah comes from Hashem down, that means that every person has equal access to it. That means if you're saying the words of Torah with your mouth, it's the same as when Moshe Rabbeinu says those words, because they're God's words. Versus davening, being that it's coming from me, what level is my davening going to be at? Whatever level I'm at. Right? We understand the difference. One is coming from God, so therefore it's at Hashem's level, versus from me, it's whatever level I'm at, that's where my davening is going to be at. But if we look at these, both of these forms of avodah, while they are so important, and obviously, like we said before, the foundations of our entire Judaism, and you can't get the third without the first two. Nevertheless, what is the emphasis on them? Their emphasis is on me and my personal relationship with Hashem. Me and, first of all, my understanding of God, my understanding of Torah, using that to connect with Hashem. And then davening is me building this personal, emotional relationship with Hashem. So it's talking about connecting my cognitive faculties to Hashem, connecting my emotional faculties to Hashem, but it's all about me and my relationship with Hashem. Versus Gemilas Chasadim has an advantage, and this is why it's elaborated on. Because Gemilas Chasadim, or like we said before, mitzvahs in general, the concept of doing a physical mitzvah is not about just you and your personal relationship with God. Doing a mitzvah is about transforming the world. Doing a mitzvah, specifically if we could think about why is Gemilas Chasadim emphasized in this context of doing a mitzvah, is because, like we said before, Gemilas Chasadim means making a space to acknowledge someone else. So it's not about my own personal relationship with Hashem. It's once I've become filled with godly light, when I'm a godly person, I recognize that the most important thing is now to look outwards. Not just to be focusing on my own personal relationship. So the way that we make ourselves a home for God is sometimes by stopping to think about myself so much. It's not so much just about me, and I don't have to worry so much about becoming the home for God. I don't have to worry so much. Well, if the emphasis is on me, then I could think, I'm never going to be worthy enough. I still have so far to go. Why would God want to reside within me? So if I'm thinking just about me and my personal relationship, it can be very disheartening, and I'll never think that I've actually reached there. Versus when I turn the focus outwards on what is the purpose of a Mishkan. The purpose of a Mishkan is to represent God in this world. So it's not about me. It's about creating a representation of God in this world with everything that I do. And then you're a Mishkan automatically. You're not even thinking about it. But automatically, by turning outward, by turning our mission outward and focusing on reaching every single place in this world and every single person in this world, when that becomes my focus, this is how we basically achieve becoming that Mishkan. And this is why that last one is elaborated on more than the others, because the point is not my personal relationship, again, even though it's still totally essential to have a relationship with God, because without having a relationship with God, you don't even begin doing the third one of transforming the world. But that's a means to an end. The end is the purpose of transforming the world. So if we look at the language, this is, again, we're going to get a little technical here, but bear with me. So if we look at the language if we go back to source number 1, we look at actually the different language of the wording of the trumas, we actually see how they represent these three different avodas, and specifically as we've been discussing them. So the first one is vayikuli truma. You should take for me a truma. So this, like we said before, represents Torah. So in Torah, what did we say Torah is? Torah is Hashem's wisdom. Torah is Hashem's wisdom. Vayikuli, you should take for me. And so Hashem is speaking in the first person to show us that this is representing through Torah. What am I doing? I'm connecting to Hashem, to Hashem himself, right? He's saying, this is for me. With learning Torah, you're connecting to me. However, it's interesting because if we look at Vayikhu li Truma, you see that Truma, the word gift, is not one with the word me. Versus if you go to the next one, Tikhu es Trumasi. Trumasi means my gift. So in the first case, in the first scenario, Vayikhu li, the word I is separate from the word Truma. Following me? Versus in the second wording, the word, it's my Truma, all in one word. Right? So this is just teaching us about the nature of Torah. It is possible to study Torah without it actually impacting you. Right? When you're learning Torah, you could be drawing this high levels of Hashem himself, Li, it's his, right? Drawing it down into the world. But there are people who study Torah even as an academic endeavor. There are people who study Torah and completely stay just non-spiritual, not as a spiritual thing. It's possible to learn Torah without it actually impacting you personally. And the reason that is because it comes from above to below. So anytime something comes from above to below, it requires a real level of work from the person below to internalize it. Anytime it's like they say, right? Lottery winners will very often lose the money. I don't even think it's very often. It's like almost always, right? That they'll almost always squander the money. And this is because it's a gift from above to below. And therefore, the process of internalization, you're able to receive the gift without truly receiving it within you in an internal way. And that's the case with Torah as well, that it's a gift from God, and it's possible to receive it without it being internalized. It requires consciousness, and part of the Avodah in this gift is to make it mine, to work to make it mine, to work to develop this personal connection with it. Versus davening, like we said before, davening is trumasi. It's my truma, meaning that davening, automatically, you're going to be transformed and impacted. Why? Because it starts with you. So because it starts with you, that means automatically I'm going to be changed. As soon as I make the choice to have kavanah in my davening, I'm introducing within myself a revelation of godliness. Right? And then the last one, by v'zais hatruma asher tikhu me'itam, God is not referred to at all. It doesn't say li at all. It doesn't say for me. It's just this is the gift. And this is because in the physical world, which is what the last one is referring to, it's through the fact that we're uplifting the physical world and uplifting physical creations. So in the physical world, on a surface level, do we see God? No. Those gold, silver, diamonds, they're not God. Those are not things where God is apparent. And really, the work of this last one is recognizing that Hashem's essence is in the physical world, even though it's not apparent. So davening and learning Torah, these are obviously spiritual endeavors. We know God is there. Maybe we have to work to internalize it with Torah, but we know God is there. Versus with this last one, the whole point is that God is hidden. The whole point is that God is not apparent. And what is our work? Our work is to reveal the godliness within this gift. And this is part of our process of becoming that person. And now we're just going to return to that interesting medrash that was talking about how all these different materials of the Mishkan correspond with these different nations. And the purpose of that is just to teach us how far our transformation is supposed to go. How far is our transformation of the world supposed to go? To the extent that even the lowest things in this world need to begin representing godliness. And so what would we say is the thing that is furthest away from the Mishkan is those nations that actually destroyed it, the nations that persecuted the Jewish people. How do we know that we've achieved the ultimate transformation? Is when even these nations of the world are transformed. So the materials of the of the Mishkan, the materials of the Mishkan are representing these nations of the world. Because when is the world going to be an ultimate Mishkan for Hashem? The world is going to, when is it that Hashem is literally going to be dwelling in this world? Is when Mashiach comes, and when Mashiach comes and all the nations of the world have become transformed, that even our biggest enemies are now in line with godliness and recognize Hashem. That is going to be when Mashiach comes and these nations are transformed. So I think you can see little hintings of that happening. I mean, you can say that even from the time of, let's say, Edom, even just the fact that, the world went from being pagan to moving towards a more monotheistic view is already, we're seeing the transformation of these nations. But our focus is on individually building our mishkans and becoming people who are walking mishkans. And through that, automatically, we filter the people around us and we impact the world around us to also slowly but surely transform, whether we realize it or not, whether we recognize the good that we're bringing into the world by becoming a personal mishkan or not. That's what's happening. And so our focus needs to be on Taira, Avaida, but specifically Gemilas Chasadim, reaching that outwards, turning outwards to everyone around us and transforming them. And with that, hopefully leading to, again, the ultimate transformation where our enemies become totally and absolutely aware of godliness and stop being our enemies. Treat us right.